Now, it's my great delight to welcome for his inaugural speech the Honourable Felix Ellis, MP, Member for Bratton. Yeah.
Madam Speaker, Naji Godjin, Nayo Felix. Come a long way from Bardi and Yaruburu, and I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this land and their elders. I also want to acknowledge any veterans watching today. To you and your family, a grateful nation simply says thank you. Madam Speaker, in 1927, a baby was born in Lithuania, a small Baltic nation in Eastern Europe. As a boy, Albert Lenegas was a gifted musician, played the trombone and the double bass. His father was the conductor of the Jewish orchestra in Kaunas, in Lithuania's second city. But like so many people of that generation, his life was torn apart at a very early age by the horrors of war. Lithuania was invaded first by the German National Socialists and later the Russian Communists, and their family was forced to flee. He was there in the bombing of Dresden. He was there in a displaced persons camp just outside of Auschwitz. And when his father died of a broken heart from leaving his country, he was forced as a young boy and the eldest of the family to feed his family and do what he could. And so he would carry bricks on a wooden sling on his back between the buildings of the bombed out cities of Europe so that he could provide for the ones he loved. But he never lost hope. He and his younger brother, also a gifted musician, couldn't find the instruments that they played. But through it all, they practiced their instruments in their heads. And in many ways, they were the lucky ones, because when the Soviet Union came through the Eastern Front and the Iron Curtain descended upon Europe, they found themselves on the American side. And they were picked up by the American army, not as soldiers, but as musicians. And they played with Louis Armstrong and some of the jazz greats of the age, to civilians and soldiers as the Marshall Plan rebuilt Europe. And when he'd done his time, Albert was offered resettlement anywhere he wanted in the free world. And he chose a country he knew very little about, on the other side of the world, Australia, because it was a young nation, a free nation, a nation where he and his family could find opportunity. And he came out to Australia and he built this country. He was in Tasmania working in mines. He was working on the Snowy Hydro. He was putting pipelines through the South Australian desert. And it was there in South Australia that he met my grandmother, Tony. They married up, settled down. They moved to Brisbane, where they owned a corner shop and had 6 kids. They passed on to them the values of hard work, of dedication, of doing what you can to look after your family. Madam Speaker, Albie was an ordinary man who lived an extraordinary life. And as an artist, a musician, a painter, a ratbag, a larrikin, he lived an extraordinary life of the mind and never let his material circumstances limit him, nor the hard times define him. And so it was that his second child, Isabel, my mum, was also and is also an ordinary person who is living an extraordinary life. She's a nurse, my dad's a plumber. They met in a small Northern Territory town on the Gulf of Carpentaria called Borroloola. Mum was working there as a remote area nurse, and one day the Royal Flying Doctor Service was coming into town to pick up a patient to take them to hospital in the city, but they couldn't get in because it was night time. And so my mum ran around to the Borroloola pub where she knew she'd find someone. And there she found this scruffy-looking bloke, Pete the plumber. And they ran around town and collected every dolphin torch they could find. And they laid it out along the Borroloola airstrip, lit the way, and the plane landed safely and took the patient to hospital. And later, Madam Speaker, a few days later, a romance was formed over dinner at the Borroloola pub. My parents have taught me the values that I live by. From my mum, I learnt to be kind as well as strong. I learnt from her to serve others. And I learnt from her the value of self-sacrifice. She's probably prayed for me every day of my life. From my dad, I learnt how to be a good man, and I learnt that it's not easy. He also taught me, Madam Speaker, that if your dad doesn't have a beard, you've got two mums. But he also taught me that's okay as well. Now, Madam Speaker, when in 1989, my parents had moved to a small Aboriginal community in the remote Kimberley region, Bardi country, a place called Lombardina. My mum was heavily pregnant with her first child, me, and the Berlin Wall came down, and Lithuania was soon to be free. But we never went back to Lithuania, Madam Speaker, because as my grandpa said, Australia is the greatest country in the world, and we're Australian now. Madam Speaker, I remember when we'd moved up there and I was still a boy, they'd closed the Bungarung leprosy facility, the last of its kind in Australia. And the people from that place who had been locked up for 50 years were then able to go back to their communities and back to their country. And I remember as a little boy with my brothers, we'd go into the clinics where Mum was working and caring for some of these people. And we'd help out little ways, looking after the old people. And we'd help by feeling the backs of their knees for the symptomatic swelling that happens to be a sign of leprosy. These people had been institutionalised for nearly their whole lives. And they were told that they couldn't achieve anything, that they couldn't mix with their community and make a contribution. But my dad gave them a job, working on the backhoe, digging trenches, laying pipes as he was putting in the deep sewer on the Dampier Peninsula. And the looks of pride in people's eyes when they knew that they earned the dinner on the table that night is simply priceless. And they called it Pete's Leper Gang. And geez, they did a good job. Madam Speaker, it's not quite a log cabin story, but it's a bark shack story. The bark shack where we grew up, sons of a nurse and a plumber, who told us that when good people serve those who need it, then there can be hopes in the hearts of all people of brighter days ahead. Now, Madam Speaker, when George Washington Carver, the man who invented peanut butter, he spoke on one occasion and he said that when common people do common things in uncommon ways, they command the attention of the world. And who are these common people? Well, they're farmers, a teacher, a nurse, a mechanic, a publican, a plumber. And what is this common thing? Well, it's to serve our community. But the uncommon way in which we're doing it in this place and at this time is to keep our community safe from the worst global pandemic in 100 years, Madam Speaker. I learned a great many things as a plumber. And if you'll forgive me, life as a plumber taught me that shit runs downhill, payday's Thursday, don't eat lunch with your fingers. That one's for real. But it also taught me hard work, humility, practical problem solving. It put me in the homes of people from all walks of life, all across this beautiful country. It showed me that it doesn't matter who you are, whether you're a pensioner living in a council flat or whether you're a well-to-do family in a big house by the beach, none of us want to do our business in the backyard. And it points to a common humanity that we all have, that I learnt, and that I believe in this time of global pandemic we're learning once again, of the spiritual and biological reality of our common humanity. Madam Speaker, we are all in this together. When President John F. Kennedy made his inaugural speech, he spoke of a long twilight struggle against the common enemies of man: tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. And he called upon a new generation to bear the heavy burden and to pay the heavy price. He spoke at that time in the context of the Cold War. And Madam Speaker, perhaps it is fitting that I come into this place as the first person to sit here who was born after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the first person elected after the start of the global pandemic. And I say to my generation who has been tasked with this extraordinary effort that we must bear the brunt so that others do not have to. I say to my generation that we must bear that heavy burden once more, that we must pay that heavy price, not because it is easy, but because it is our duty to do what is right. Madam Speaker, it will get harder before it will get easier. And the actions that my generation take will keep safe my grandpa's generation. The generation that built this country, that built our peace and our prosperity, that built our future. We owe it to them, and we will do what it takes. But Madam Speaker, I also say to the generations who've gone before us, know what it is that you are asking of us to do. The focus must be on combating this global pandemic, but we must never lose sight of securing the future. I believe it is the wish of all decent people that the next generation will live better than the last. And the actions that we take in this place must be prudent. They must be measured, because everything that we do here takes from the hands of our young people and from our children, both born and unborn. The debt must be repaid, and it must be repaid with greater opportunity for our young and brighter days ahead. Madam Speaker, we need to build our state once more. We need to do the heavy work. I ask not as a rich son of a rich father, but as a plumber son of a plumber. What can you do to build our future? Now, Madam Speaker, if you'll permit me to digress, I have a few thank yous to make. Firstly, and most importantly, to the people of Braddon. Thank you for placing your trust in me. I will not let you down. To my beautiful wife-to-be, Margot, you're the queen of my heart. Through you, all things are possible. One day I know we'll bring a family into this world, and when our children come of age, I pray that Tasmania would be a place of opportunities unmatched anywhere in the world. And I hope that my actions in this place can contribute to that. To my mum, Isabel, my dad, Peter, my grandparents, Tim, Sandra, all my brothers and my sister, thank you for making me the man I am today. To those who put food on my table over the years, Bernard and Dolores Byrne, Chris and Maud Bramich, the Allen family, Kurt and Susan Harnett, thank you. Thank you to Richard Colbeck and Gayleen Colbeck. Thank you to those who've mentored me in public life so far. Roger and Stephanie Enge, Jeremy Rockcliffe, Sandra Knowles, Adam Brooks, Tanya Dennison, Gavin Pearce, Megan McGinty, and a special thank you to Joan Ryler and Rod Ryler. Joan, you got our community back on its feet in the North West Coast, and I thank you for that. And I also thank you for passing the torch to a new generation. Madam Speaker, I'd also like to thank all the people that took a shot on the young bloke, worked flat out on his campaign. Eric and Anna Mobbs, Brett and Sue Whiteley, Lynn Page, Daniel Harris, Nigel and Richard Morgan, and too many others. I probably haven't, and I probably can't thank you enough. And I'd like to acknowledge the examples of those who've gone before and have done the right thing in the world. Washington, Wilberforce, Christ, King, Lincoln, Churchill, Menzies, Curtin, Howard, Hawke, Rees, Gray, Pearson, Dodson. I know I can't live up to your example, but geez, I'll try. Madam Speaker, our island community has been counted out in the hard times before, but we have always stood up. In 1870, British writer Anthony Trollope wrote of Tasmania that it was sad to see a British colony whose best days were behind it. But less than a year later, a farmer from Forth, Philosopher Smith, discovered a mountain of tin at Mount Bischoff near Waratah. It became the richest mining town in the world, and the future of the colony was secured. In 1912, the North Mount Lyell disaster took the lives of more than 40 men as a fire ripped through the economic engine room of our state. But less than 2 years later, the Hydroelectric Commission was formed, and that began one of the most ambitious engineering projects anywhere in the world. And it was to form the backbone of our economy for generations. In 1939, Joe Lyons, Tasmania's only Prime Minister, died while in office at the dawn of the Second World War. By 1943, his darling wife, Dame Enid, had stepped into his place, and she was to sit in the Menzies cabinet that rebuilt Australia. In 1975, the Tasman Bridge came down and cut our capital city in two. But it was the ferryman, Bob Clifford, who united the capital, kept people together, and he founded Incat at that time, which was to go on to become one of Tasmania's greatest manufacturing stories. And less than 10 years ago, our forest industry had collapsed, Caterpillar had gone to Thailand, and people were leaving our state in droves. But under new leadership, Tasmania is prouder, stronger, and more confident, and we are in many ways the envy of the nation. Madam Speaker, we have been counted out in the hard times before, and we have always stood up, because that is who we are as Tasmanians. It is the indomitable spirit, that iron will. It was summed up in the creed of the old apt railway workers. We find a way, or we make one. And Madam Speaker, Albert Einstein, another Albert, said on one occasion, if I had my time again, I would not choose to be a scientist or a teacher or a scholar, but instead I would be a plumber, with the hope of some modest independence, which is still possible under the present circumstances. And it is that spirit, that independence, that forms the basis of so much that is good in our world, that animates the generations throughout time, that animated my grandfather's generation and my parents to brighter things and brighter days. It was called the American War of Independence. And though it was also a war for freedom, it was not that. And though it was also a war for democracy, it was not that too. It was, as it says on the box, a war for independence. That a free people be able to choose their own destiny, be able to choose their own future. Madam Speaker, in 1989, 2 million people held hands and formed a human chain across 675 kilometres through Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, and demanded of the evil empire that they be free, that they are independent nations, that they have the right to choose their own destiny and they have the right to choose their own future. And Madam Speaker, we know of this basic human impulse well in Tasmania, that small independence, that you would own the family home, that you'd have a decent job, and that you could still find time to catch a few flathead in the Mersey. But Madam Speaker, we must renew again our commitment to a larger independence. Tasmania has begun the great project of standing on our own 2 feet, of providing for our own future, of determining our own destiny. We must make the hard decisions in this place so that we can all say, we can look people in the eye and say that we're earning it, that we've earned it, that we earned it in the past and we pass the torch to the next generation. That is what it is to be independent. And Madam Speaker, there will be people who tell us that it cannot be done. But I say to you today that it must be done. I come from a place, Western Australia, that is vast and barren, in many cases grinding isolation and poverty as a way of life. Western Australia was the recipient of special assistance through the Commonwealth Grants Commission for decades. But then the hard decisions were made that Western Australia would finally stand on its own 2 feet. And through that same determination that we know well here in Tasmania, it was achieved. And Western Australia is now one of the richest jurisdictions in the world. It can be done. It must be done. In Tasmania, it is time for the transformation that we wish to see in this place. We are a land that is of abundant natural resources, of beautiful, fertile soil, of ingenuity amongst our people that is unmatched almost anywhere in the world. And we have that human spirit that says we will be independent and that we will be free. Our federation has been hard on Tasmania, Madam Speaker, for more than 100 years through laws around shipping, industry, the environment and much else besides. But it's time for us to take extreme ownership as Tasmanians of our future, of our destiny, so that we can stand amongst the community of Australian states and amongst the community of free peoples and say that we are independent and that we got there under our own steam. We must harness again that creed. We find a way, or we make one. And Madam Speaker, I say to you today that there are brighter days ahead, even in the dark times. In a time of global pandemic, I've seen it on the northwest coast. We are blessed to live where we live and live the kind of lives that we lead. Madam Speaker, there are brighter days ahead. For the young mum from Burnie with 2 kids she's raising with their grandma, but still finds time to go to night school to educate the next generation. There are brighter days ahead for the bloke driving trucks from Smithton who still finds time to pull on the boots and play footy on the weekend. There are brighter days ahead. There are brighter days ahead, Madam Speaker, for the young bloke from Port Sorell who's working down the west coast and has finally become the family man he always wished he could be. There are brighter days ahead, Madam Speaker, there are brighter days ahead for the nurse from Devonport who's working the extra shift so that she can pay the wages in her hubby's business this week. For the farming family on King Island who don't know if the kids are going to take over the farm, but they're still expanding anyway because it will provide jobs for locals. There are brighter days ahead. And there are brighter days ahead for the paramedic who's come down from the mainland to Turners Beach with his family so that he can buy a house and follow a dream. To you, my brother, I say there are brighter days ahead. And there are brighter days ahead for the first-year apprentice from Devonport, who's the first person in her family for 2 generations to go to work. There are brighter days ahead. History is written by those who show up. And if it is asked in years hence how it was that a young plumber from a bark shack in the middle of nowhere of Lithuanian descent came to sit in this place, then let history record. I showed up because I believe in Tasmania there are brighter days ahead. Galamabu, let's get stuck into it.